any miners to watch in 2015 and beyond that you want to talk about?
Mining companies that I like, or companies exposed to precious metals prices, I've talked about Silver Wheaton, which I think has a slightly different business plan, which I like. Randgold Resources is one I follow, and that is, in the analogy, it's like the Rolls-Royce. It's expensive, but it's good. And it has, those two companies have probably been the two standout performers in the last decade in terms of gold mining, and that I think you can largely lay at the door of management and say that they had a vision and they executed very well against that vision, and that is worth a lot in mining companies. So I'd highlight those two. The smaller ones, I would highlight Caledonia Mining and Pan-African Resources in Southern Africa, in production, making profit, paying dividends, and dividends are they are a facet of investment that shouldn't be underrated, and I think those two are very interesting. I think that Arian Silver is interesting. It's climbing that, it's at an earlier stage than the other companies, but it's climbing that, that trajectory from explorer to producer. So I think that's, and I think that's interesting for that reason, and it's in a good jurisdiction, which is Mexico, and it is relatively cheap. It is something that's moving into production, but is probably valued as more like an explorer, even cheaper than the average explorer at the current time. And it's a sizable resource. If you were to put it in gold equivalent terms, it'd be more than 2 million ounces of gold. So it's a significant resource in that respect. So that's one to look out for. Moana Africa is a company which is in Zimbabwe. It attracts a high discount because of that in the market. But if it was anywhere else in the world, it would attract a much higher rating. And so I think that is a company to look out for as well, just for the possibility, well, not just for the possibility, but partly for the possibility that you might see an unwinding of that discount. That also applies to Caledonia, who I mentioned before. They're also a company which is in that part of the world. So there's a smorgasbord of companies across, consistent with the portfolio theory that goes from the very big multi-asset companies through the sort of single asset producers into the explorers as well. So I suppose one final one that I should mention is Euromax Resources. Slightly different in that it's looking to develop a copper gold porphyry in Macedonia, in the Balkans. And it has just announced it's going through a bankable feasibility study of the process at the moment, which it should have out by the end of the year. And it's also announced that it has provided mandates to banks in order to look to raise debt finance at the same time as it's entered a streaming agreement. So a lot of the financing risk has already been mitigated by those actions, and it's taking a lot of preemptive actions in order to, so that when they're in a position to finance, they can finance as quickly as possible and then get the mine into production. And contrary to popular belief is that mining is not something that happens in Europe. Actually, there's some very good ore bodies in Europe, and there are some jurisdictions which are quite pro-mining, and they tend to be on the periphery of Europe. We don't like mining so much in Surrey and North Germany and Belgium and around Paris so much, but around the periphery, it is a viable and popular way, indeed, of creating value and providing jobs as well. So countries like that are trying to put in place environments, legislative environments that are relatively pro-money that will attract that sort of investment. So actually, being in Europe from that perspective is a good thing for them. And it's an interesting ore body. It's also an interesting ore body from the perspective of the fact that it's very homogeneous. and therefore once in production it will act a little bit like an annuity. In fact, it almost doesn't suit mining investors so much, because mining investors tend to like high grade, low grade. But this would be almost like an annuity.